the one word Emmanuel is in itself a whole package to be opened. El, God, Immanuch, with us, condensed into one word. The now blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich had, as we know, many mystical experiences, but one of the visions that she had was the moment of birth of our Blessed Saviour. And she saw how our Blessed Lady, at the moment in which the Christ child was no longer in her womb, but outside her person and her body, she had the strange feeling that the presence that hitherto she had borne was now outside and in front of her. In the account of the early experiences at Medjugorje, it is reported that Our Lady did indicate that the experience of receiving her son was of the same order, no less, as that of having a vision of her, trying to indicate that we have the maximum already and that people belittle what actually they do have. The old saying, familiarity breeds contempt, holds true for all humanity, but especially in our case. We are Emmanuel at that moment when we receive her divine Son. If one observes the comportment of the pilgrims in that place of encounter with heaven, one notices how when they go to a place where she is to appear, they go into physical worship, attention, reflectiveness, and interiority. They are quite expressive. Everyone is silent and they are fully aware. One can hear a pin drop and people fall to their knees. However, sometimes when it comes to Holy Communion, one is puzzled. Perhaps not so much in Medjugorje itself, but in general, that same attention is all but present quite often. One day I received a letter from a young mother in distress, concerned about the way that the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament was not being given the honour that by instinct she knew was his due. She was addressing certain issues, two in particular: the ease with which the non-ordained went directly into the custody of the Blessed Sacrament, that is, the tabernacle itself, and also the way in which her own children had been puzzled and upset by wanting to go for a blessing to the priest and finding that a layperson was getting in the way and by a shortcut doing it for the priest. They didn't know what was going on. And I simply advised the good lady, rather than ask me, to ask the congregation for divine worship. And she did. And as they do, they wrote back immediately. And it was one of those properly written, thought out replies the Vatican can give, with a protocol number and everything, because they know that these are then read by others. And it did indicate certain things, notably that her sense of the faithful was correct, and that the custody of the Blessed Sacrament was in the hands of the Church, and that only a deacon, priest or bishop had access to that custody. The bottom line being that the Blessed Sacrament is the gift of the Church and cannot be appropriated directly. And so her instinct was bang on. But there is more going on than meets the eye. We know that the now canonized Saint Mother of Calcutta made this comment once when asked what upset her most when she travelled the world. And she answered without a moment's reflection, it was this, the way in which everywhere she sees that the body of the Lord is received by people in their hands. She, having a very Eucharistic life and also a mystical and aware as she was of the way in which the Lord was truly present and the centre of it all in the Blessed Sacrament, was able to feel the Lord's pain, that this was part of precisely the work of a sinister force, that we are in a period of direct head-on attack of the sacred. One time I was in a moment of retreat thinking about something important, a choice to be made by the Lord, and with permission I was in this time of momentary separation of a couple of days from my community in Venice, actually, in the hands of a very holy priest there, who was trying to found actually a community. He was of the fraternity of St. Peter, and therefore exclusively in the old rite, but with obedience to the Church. And he made this aside at one point, that he did not share my views with regard to the present Mass, because he felt that in conscience he could not actually celebrate it. He would only use the old rite, and he explained why. He explained that there was, on the level of the Church, an attack on the sacred, and that it couldn't be pleasing to our Saviour. And therefore he felt the pain of that same Saviour and did not want to in any way play the game of the one who was successfully taking away the defences for the sacred. We have, just outside our parish, a new foundation of Benedictines who also have exclusively the old rite. They are growing and multiplying, and the Lord is blessing them, but I see there the difference between their solution and ours, where I was ordained. The fact of not using the new means that they are considerably limited, because the fact that we had kept the maximum of the old, but in the new, that is, we'd kept Gregorian chant, we'd kept the daily incense and the high water, using it facing the other way on weekdays, meant that we had the blessings of the reverence of the old, but it also meant, and this is not without importance, that any altar in the whole Catholic Church was ours, because we were in the present rite. The philosophy behind it is this: you meet the people where they're at, and you do your best in that context. It can be done, although one suffers, but it's actually something which then places the problem on the priest himself. There, what one does is this: one makes sure that, at least personally, one is in complete obedience with regard to the way things should be done, but also, and this is the important bit, one draws the people with one into an encounter, because if the celebrant himself is in mode of contact, intimacy, reverence and love, is it not true that the people will somehow pick it up and also be influenced by it? it can be done, especially if one has access over a regular time and period to the same people. I noticed the difference between the experience of being one of the brethren on a Sunday, where one had the maximum, but with about 500 people on a Sunday, always different each time, coming as tourists, but there. And then when for a long time I was sent to a church on a Sunday morning, where one had the same people each time. In the second case, it was different insofar as one formed a community, and one can. It can be done. The power for good of a priest who has access to the same people for a long period is considerable. People actually do respond, and they will respond also to certain teachings, e.g. confession. Things change over a period. So much depends not just on the actual rubrics, but on the person who is celebrating. We blame the wrong thing quite often. There was a big advantage in Italy insofar as we didn't use extraordinary ministers, and also people just didn't come up for Holy Communion as they do in Ireland. At a funeral, the church would be full, but you might have 10 or at the most 20 coming up for Holy Communion. The instinct was still there. And so we didn't have that amount of sacrilege. With regard to ourselves, we need to be aware that what I started off with, familiarity breeds contempt, is important. We are frequently exposed to the Blessed Sacrament. We even have it exposed before us in adoration. We can forget. In the Eastern Church, they only have one celebration a week normally. It is fully sung and 3 hours long. Therefore, it's not quite so ordinary. They're always hitting the maximum and coming down not with a crash, but gradually. It's an event. We need to be careful with our liturgical snacks. God is God, man is man, and to crash in and out of God as though he were one of us is to attack the sacred and not benefit from the encounter. I am convinced that many graces are unpacked, or rather remain in their package, because we do not actually take the trouble to open them properly. We don't actually receive well the balm which is before us each time. I just conclude. One time, I believe it was St. Philip Neri who saw a lady going out of church without thanksgiving after Holy Communion. If it wasn't him, it was the Curé Vase. Whichever of the two it was, the priest told immediately his 2 altar boys to go and follow that communicant all the way with their large candles until she got to her house. The person never did it again. And we perhaps forget that we also are moving tabernacles for those first few minutes after Holy Communion. It's not the time to talk to each other. We have angels adoring around us, and we are talking about the weather.